I've mentioned this recent book by Michael Pollan, a well-known author, before, How to Change Your Mind, what the new science of psychedelics teaches us about consciousness, dying, addiction, depression, and transcendence. You may remember, if you were here, that I actually gave a teisho based on some book reviews of it from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. What I'd like to do this time is actually go through what he calls the travelogue part of the book, where he describes his own, quote, trips. Now, to be clear here, the interesting thing for us, is I always quote Ram Dass, who did a lot of that in the early days in the 60s, and then realized, well, if you want to go deeper, you've got to meditate. So he went to India, found a guru, and he's, became Ram Dass, he does point out, this author, that there are other ways to get to where we're going, and including meditation and breath work, and not just, this kind of trip. And of course, that's what I'm going to be interested in here. What are the experiences that he has that we can get to through meditation? How can that help illustrate, what we're going for, what we can expect? Now, for full disclosure, I've never done any kind of, psychedelic drugs, although I know people who have, and I'm not advocating it. I'm simply saying these, interesting to see how his experiences can illustrate the kind of thing that meditation does lead to. And he mentions Buddhism any number of times in here, as you'll see in part. The thing on the breath work, though, he describes a preliminary experience he had before going on the trip, which involved breath work, and it's very powerful stuff. With my yoga teacher, my Arhatic yoga teacher, he always had us do breath exercises before we meditated. It's not really the custom in Zen, but you can do that. I think I've illustrated once before some of the things we did, like it can be pretty violent. And I've done serious breath work at least once before, and it's very powerful. And I'm going to do it again next month on a retreat I'm going on. So that's another approach. In Zen we do focus on the breath, and many practices do, but it's much calmer. It's as you know, it's just the natural following of the breath. So in a sense, you're going to the same place, but you're doing it a little more gradually, you're doing it a little more calmly, and in that sense, I think perhaps in the long run, a little more effectively, that it'll have more long-term effect, and a greater effect, if you're approaching it gradually. At least, that's one way to look at it. But it is interesting that all these practices have some kind of breath component, and how could they not? Because that's life, and that's what we're investigating and deepening. So he has 3 trips on 3 different drugs, and I'm just going to illustrate some of the things he experiences and how that relates to our Zen practice, or how it might relate to his Zen practice. He speaks a lot about his guides. Then he speaks about the breath work that he did that I just mentioned. And goes through a few other things. But then he's speaking about what the kind of the dragons or the monsters that you meet if you practice. When you go down into the cave, you stir up the monsters. One instructor said at Johns Hopkins, actually, in an official capacity, instead of turning away from any monster that appears, move toward it. Stand your ground and demand to know, what are you doing in my mind? And what do you have to teach me? So that should be the courageous thing you do when you meet, and not just literal monsters, with an image of some kind, but actual feelings or traumas and things that may come up. And as you know, in Zen and these other types of centering prayer, also the practices, you don't deal with them directly during the practice, but they will come up, and you take note of them, unloading of the unconscious, as Thomas Keating calls it. and you deal with it elsewhere. But also that kind of openness and that kind of strength you get from sitting can help you. You can actually release some of the monsters, if they're not too profound. But otherwise, it's an invitation to investigate. And he goes on to explain explain how, and I've seen this with others that have described their experiences to me in this kind of approach. That they often meet family members and ancestors, and that relates to family issues. As I'm saying, some of the monsters that come up are like mothers-in-law. No, I don't mean that. But in the sense that they have the family issues, the parental issues, maybe back even further. So, some practitioners go back, to previous, the whole extended family therapy going back generations, and how that actually does, of course, influence, the whole structure. So all that's part of the dynamic of, reconciliation, forgiveness, grief work. It's all very powerful and needs to be integrated into our full practice. As I say, usually not wrestling with these things directly on the cushion, although if you get overwhelmed with tears, etc., well, you let that flow. That's part of the going deeper into yourself. Even in the Zen practice, if that should happen to come up. So that's interesting. Vision of nature. Getting absorbed in a tracery of mycelium, threading among the roots of trees and linking the trees in a network intricate beyond comprehension. Now, that's part of, an intricate network beyond all comprehension that we do tap into. It doesn't have to be, the image of trees or roots, but what about the tree of life? What about the interconnectedness of everything? So that is, what we can come to experience. For our trees in a forest exchange information, but that what had merely been an intellectual conceit was a vivid felt reality of which I became a part. So you let go of the boundaries of your ego and you're able to feel yourself much part of a whole network of interrelationships, whatever particular form it might take. But that's in fact who we are, the interrelatedness of everything, dependent co-arising, etc., as the Buddhists call it. He was asked to bring something hard and something soft to put on an altar, for example. We should bring that to our practice. Something hard and something soft. You need the masculine and the feminine. You need both those qualities in order to do the work. It's an interesting notion. And then, as he was having these experiences, a flood tide of compassion overflowed its banks. All right, so this is what you meet. Whatever the method, whatever, the technique, you meet a reality which is ultimately a flood, an ocean of compassion. That's what's actually there. And that's what you should encounter, what should well up. A cascading dam break of love. He often says in this book that this sounds, kind of trite, but, when you're actually feeling it, it's a big deal. Love is everything. He says, sounds like a Hallmark card. But he's speaking about a platitude. It's a good question he asks you. Is a platitude so deeply felt still a platitude? And he says, no. A platitude is precisely what is left of the truth after it has been drained of all emotion. So when you actually experience the emotion of what's behind, what gives rise to quotes platitudes, it's not a platitude. It's just an ocean of reality, which is a really, really good distinction to make. You have to resaturate that dried husk with a feeling to see it for what it is, as he says very well. So he says, what medicine or what meditation does, what it should do for us, it's as he says, the ego's attempt to make things seem banal. Oh, that's so banal. Or ironic, have a sense of irony, trying to criticize it, be above everything. He says those are all defenses, some of the sturdier defenses the adult ego deploys to keep from being overwhelmed. So a lot of what our ego does is ego defenses. And what you got to be prepared for, when you have to want, when you go sit on your cushion, is to let down the defenses. Let the defenses get let down, and be overwhelmed. You know, with tears or joy or whatever it might be, or monster encounters or whatever, because that's a fuller reality, as he says. Otherwise, our senses are liable to, at any time, to astonish us with the news of the sheer wonder of the world. Yes, exactly. So if we ever get through, if we're to get through the day, we need to put some of that maybe in neat little boxes. But it's not really living, you know. Is this reclassification of the familiar a waste of time? If it is, then so is a lot of art. That's what art tries to do, right? It tries to wake you up to deeper dimensions of things that are right there, but you don't see. It sharpens, gives you a quicker entrance. And that comes up again, as you'll see in a minute, in a very interesting way. It seems to me there's great value in such renovation, the more so as we grow older and come to think we've seen and felt it all before. No, every moment is new if you let yourself be overwhelmed. If you're not afraid to be overwhelmed. So this is a very good point that he makes here. I quoted Aldous Huxley. This quote was in one of the reviews. For the moment, that interfering neurotic who in waking hours tries to run the show, in other words, your ego, was blessedly out of the way. That interfering neurotic. Remember, that interfering neurotic is not you. Don't go around saying, I'm interfering neurotic. No, that's just your ego, and it's not you. That's the primary insight, by the way, that he has at the end of all of this, is that, wow, we're so much more than our egos. And as he says, the Buddhists have been trying to tell us that for a long time. Christians, not so much, unfortunately. But we should have been able to speak that language better, get down to our true Christ self, or whatever. But our ego is not who we are. A dam had been breached, and the sensation of release felt wonderful, he said. So that was one trip. The second trip, again, he describes his guide, a woman this time, music. All of reality, windows, walls, plants, was jeweled with light. So you see the inner luminosity of things. And you should, by sitting on the pillow, everything becomes luminous, including you. That's the inner radiance of stuff, of things. That's there. It's like the transfiguration, in Jesus on the Mount. But it's the inner luminosity of things. Diamonds everywhere, as he says. And even his guide seemed to be like some ancestral woman that you could see some other way, and his own face seemed like his grandfather's. It's really interesting because we are all connected that way. And who are we really? We're everybody, everywhere in the world, as Dogen says, and I often quote. So those are just momentary reflections of a deeper truth that we can have, on our cushion. Really interesting sense of his self began to fall apart before his eyes. He became like, I was spread out over the landscape like paint or butter, thinly coating a wide expanse of the world with the substance I recognized as me. That sounds funny, but, that's how fluid we are. We're kind of, all of reality is us. We kind of coat everything. All of reality has a coating that's us, because we are connected to everything. And so we don't have this, clear form and this clear, division in this clear outline. And then we're kind of smeared all over the whole of reality. It's a very graphic illustration of a deeper truth of who we really are. What's my vantage point? You don't have a vantage point anymore. There's no first-person pronoun anymore, as he says. It's fascinating. The quotes personal had been obliterated. That perspective was supremely indifferent, neutral on all questions of interpretation, and unperturbed even in the face of what should by all rights have been an unmitigated personal disaster. I'm dissolved. I'm not here anymore. Well, that part of you isn't. But the supreme indifference, the benign indifference, as he says in the next paragraph. That's the absolute. Our usual categorization, oh, this is beautiful, this is good, this is dangerous. No. It seems indifferent, but it's just because it's all inclusive. And it's supremely liberating. And all the superficial emotions and judgments we're freed from. That's immensely powerful. And that is what it feels like. That you can reach there's a feeling tone, but as he says, it was calm, unburdened content. And that's very true. He says some have called this cosmic consciousness, the oversoul, or universal mind, he says. But then he says this is supposed to exist outside our brains. No. The whole point is that it's all inclusive. He kind of makes a little mistake here. It seems seemingly that, well, I'm here and it's out there, the cosmic. No. There's no inside, outside anymore, objective. And me, it, it's just the consciousness which you are. And it's beyond anything that you thought you were before. So it's not that it's something outside, originated outside of me, or it's inside of me. I think he gets a little mixed up there. But he does see that everything can be regarded objectively and accepted with equanimity. You remember Joe Shu, who's asked what it's all about, and he says, stop picking and choosing, and that's what it's all about. Stop picking and choosing, stop judging, stop categorizing, stop preferring, stop rejecting, stop. It's the supreme benevolent indifference, because everything is as it is, ultimately as it should be. Very interesting stuff. Dealing with death as one of those things that he says, I learned I had to mourn. You have to do the work, but at the same time that liberates you. And it's not something you're afraid of anymore. Because what's death? When you're everything. He comes to that realization, as we should. I spoke about music. We're just listening to music, the choir upstairs. This is something my brother and my nephews, and other musicians in my family would understand very well. But one of the music pieces he was listening to was a Bach cello, D minor cello suite from Yo-Yo Ma. And he said, never before has anything pierced me as deeply as this now. It wasn't even music in the sense of what happened was he became the violin. He could feel the strings across himself. And he went inside the cello, and he resonated. He became the wood. The music was, played on him. And it's just one of these visions you can have in a situation like that. But in terms of actual experience and the spiritual experience, the whole universe is sound and is a symphony. The music of the spheres. Everything has its vibration, has its pitch, has its tone. And that's what we are. We're the whole symphony. So you actually resonate and vibrate with the music of the whole creation. That's what's really going on. And that's what you can experience. So you are the symphony yourself. So get in tune. Anyway, you'll make use of whatever your tune is. So that's a fascinating experience he had there, losing himself, as the music. So he's in the going over it afterwards with the guy. He says, "You have a taste of a different, less defended way to be. Learn to relax the ego's trigger happy command of my reaction to people and events. Trigger happy, that's good. Knee-jerk is another way of saying it. It's so superficial and quick. Now you've had an experience of another way to react, or not react. That can be cultivated. Meditations, he suggested, was the way to do that. One way to do that. To cultivate this mode of consciousness requires us to transcend our subjectivity, or rather, this is a good way of putting it, Bernie Glassman has done that, widen its circle. You don't have to crush your subjectivity, you just have to widen it. So far that it takes in, besides ourselves, other people, and beyond that, all of nature. So the one subjectivity. A sense of our interconnectedness. Another platitude, he says, but that becomes flesh, it becomes real. And that's what should be happening for us as well. All right, let me go quickly through this third one. One he'd never heard before, and I never heard before. Smoked venom of the Sonoran desert toad. So it's doing the toad. One of the things that he experienced was, that was really scary, was like, first of all, it felt like a rocket launch, and then going all the way back to the Big Bang, where there was just nothing separate, no form, just pure being. He said it was terrifying. Well, I guess. But that's the absolute, just before the Big Bang. And we can actually experience that. And then it flows out again, as it did for him. It flows out again to form. But that's the whole cycle, that's the whole point. The absolute is form, the absolute is emptiness, and emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. Different modalities, different combinations of those experiences. So he had the radical, the radical experience of each, which really threw him. But it was, a miraculous thing. So, afterwards he quotes a few authors, which I'll conclude with this. He says their experiences that they're quoting here make a lot more sense to him now, not just something he read about, but something he knows from an inner experience that we can too. Ralph Waldo Emerson, in a wintry New England. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. Experience of nature. I become a transparent eyeball. That's really good. You are the perception itself. Seeing. Seeing itself. The whole thing. Pure consciousness. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part of a particle of God. Okay, that's 19th century New England way of putting it. Although that transparent eyeball is pretty interesting. Walt Whitman, in the early lines of the first, much briefer and more mystical edition of Leaves of Grass. Swiftly arose and spread about me the peace and joy and knowledge that pass all the art and argument of the earth, and I know that the hand of God is the elder hand of my own. And I know that the Spirit of God is the eldest brother of my own. And that all the men ever born are also my brothers. And the women my sisters and lovers. And that a kelson is part of a hull of a boat. In other words, a primary component of the creation is love. And finally, Lord Tennyson, talking about a waking trance. All at once, as it were, out of the intensity of the consciousness of individuality, the individuality itself seemed to dissolve and fade into boundless being. It was not a confused state, but the clearest of the clearest, he says. The surest of the surest. Utterly beyond words. Where death was an almost laughable impossibility. There you go. The loss of personality, if so it were, seeming no extinction, but the only true life. So the loss of your limited personality that you so identify with was not a loss at all, but a true life. Boundless being. So he has a few final words about the ego. That stingy, vigilant security guard admits only the narrowest bandwidth of reality, a measly trickle of the kind of consciousness which will help us stay alive. Right? So let phrases like that, spur you on to get beyond your ego, in your practice and stop identifying with it so much. All mean egotism vanishes, as we've just said. And finally, the gulf between self and world, that no man's land which in ordinary hours the ego so vigilantly patrols, closes down, allowing us to feel less separate and more connected, part and particle of some larger entity. Whether we call that entity nature, mind at large, or God, hardly matters, because it's just a name. But it seems to be in the crucible of that merging that death loses some of its sting.